Welcome. We're really excited to have you with us for Shifts Happen, where we're going to be discussing this morning how COVID-19 disruptions can offer new opportunities for moving towards personalization and competency-based approaches. We've got three great national experts on this topic that you'll be hearing from this morning: Karen Hess, Rose Colby, and Dan Joseph. And I am John Furrier. I'm the Executive Director of Education Systems Center at Northern Illinois University. Our organization is thrilled to host today's webinar, and we're also thrilled by the strong interest that's demonstrated by the number of folks that we have on the line. We just broke the 100 participant threshold, so excited to see that. Our organization at Ed Systems had led the multi-year process to enact the Post-Secondary and Workforce Readiness Act, or the POWER Act, which created the state's competency-based education pilot program. And we work closely to support the Illinois State Board of Education as they scale the pilot to 47 school districts. ISB really showed tremendous leadership in the scaling of CB work throughout the state. And I want to acknowledge our ISB colleagues who are on the line today, particularly Angelique Hamilton and Shannon Becker, who have been key supporters of the CB pilots and the various CB pilot sites. So while the POWER Act pilot created a comprehensive structure for the implementation of personalized and competency-based approaches, all districts within Illinois have the ability to implement these approaches, even if you're not part of the PWRX pilot. And that's going to be particularly true next year if, as we all expect, there's going to be continued flexibility from the state around seat time and calendar-based requirements as part of the state's continued response to COVID-19. So we had felt that it was really important to host this conversation and to start to develop plans for ongoing supports for districts who are engaging in competency-based approaches. As we know that the abrupt shift to remote learning that happened over the course of last spring really created a space to assess what schools should look like going forward. And within that space, there's a chance to be able to address and tackle the inequities that are baked into our current system. So for those districts that are wanting to make shifts in their instructional approaches, we have the opportunity here within our state to learn from national leaders and also those models that are from the PWRX pilots that have moved ahead. And we're going to be highlighting many of those models in today's discussion. So in addition to our three incredible speakers, I also want to acknowledge Paul Leather and the University of Kentucky Center for Innovation and Education, which has been a key thought leader with us as part of this work, and they're on the line today. So welcome, Paul. So generally, the goal that we have today is to provide you with some actionable frameworks that you can use for your planning in next school year and beyond, and also to highlight a number of Illinois examples that are out in front on this work. And my organization at Education Systems Center, we're looking forward to being there to help along the way. So with that, I want to go ahead and provide the chance for our speakers to introduce themselves. And actually, before I do that, let me go over a few tech tips and some intro items. So again, your video and microphones are turned off for this webinar, but what we really want you to do is chat, lots of chat. Please chat throughout. That's where we're going to want to have a very robust conversation. We're also going to be able to keep this chat as part of the information that we'll gain from you as part of this process. There's a Q&A feature that you can see. If you have questions that you want to pose in the Q&A, please go ahead and add those in. And there's the ability to also, if you see a question that you like, use the upvote feature, and we'll make sure that that gets raised higher within the list for answering. We're going to have a section at the end for Q&A. So if we're not getting to your question as you're providing it, we're going to go back to them toward the end of this. We'll probably go past 10:30, but we invite you to stay on for the Q&A discussion. And also, we're going to have several polls. So as those polls pop up, please respond to them quickly, but that's going to be an important way that we're going to get responses from you all as we're going through the webinar today. So now I think we can go ahead and move to the introductions for our speakers this morning. And Karen, I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself.
Okay, thanks, John. Good morning, everyone. We were saying that this was the first time we actually had to worry about what we were wearing in a long time. But I'm glad to be here. My work with competencies goes back to work with Rhode Island, New Hampshire's model competencies and performance assessment work, and more recently with several people who are going to be speaking today with the Illinois pilots. As a matter of fact, I will say that the work with those pilots on performance assessment a year ago actually inspired me to think we needed to write this book that we're sharing with you some of the content of today. And I'll turn it to Rose.
Hi, I'm Rose Colby, and thrilled to be here today with all of you. Many of you on the webinar today are friends. Happy to reconnect. And yes, competency education has really been my world for the last, 12 to 15 years anyways, working closely with Paul Leather in New Hampshire, along with some other fantastic educators throughout that state, where we really learned a lot about the structures of CBE, and learning now that really what we've developed over time as educational designers, if you will, are really meeting the equity issues that we currently have in American education. So this is the time. Karen and Dan and I have worked on developing toolkits for folks that wherever your entry point is in this work, you'll have something to work with as you guide and lead your school districts.
Hi,
Dan.
good morning. Oh, Rose, you took some of my material.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Hi, I don't know many of you. I've been watching the chat box, very excited to virtually meet many of you. My name is Dan Joseph. I'm here in Maine, and I have been a part of the Maine proficiency-based and now merging into competency-based experience at many levels, at the building level as well as the state level. I've also done work nationally with a couple of organizations, and I'm really excited to have had the opportunity to share our learning and to share our journeys with you today. My focus of my work with the company that I have founded is really a deep look at policy, public will, and practice, and really making sure that the systems we're building are designed around students and that they're student facing, and high school redesign instead of, I mean, it looks like career ladders, and elementary school is really that whole idea of student ownership and student setting the pace and student goal setting and really creating that agency and that equity. So having said all that, the next slide, I'm very excited and thrilled to introduce our book. Karen, Rose, and I we had a lot of intersections in terms of, I was using some of Karen's tools, and Rose and I were introduced through our work in New Hampshire. And we're really excited about this book in that it's a culmination of all of our experiences, and it's placed on a framework where it's accessible to the reader in the form that it's a toolkit. But the toolkit also has a lot of flexibility and research-based practices that'll help you identify where you are on your journey and what your next step is. And as far as our journey for today, the next slide. This is what we're going to be looking at for our deliverables, our learning outcomes for today. As John mentioned in the introduction, we're in unprecedented times. COVID-19 created a disruption and a challenge in our processes of learning. It maybe even pulled back the curtain around our systems and the levels of system to offer learning that is truly anytime, anywhere, any place. So we're here today to invite you into a conversation around systems, around instruction and assessment, to really identify opportunities and challenges as we look into an uncertain future, as we head back into schools this fall. I'm having conversations with schools that I work with, and these are some of the things that we've talked about. So for our purposes today, we want you to reflect on your current experiences while navigating the shifts of face-to-face teaching and learning into a more virtual setting. We can't just make whatever we've done face-to-face is not going to transition right over into a virtual learning. So we want to be taking a deeper look at that and have you reflect on them. We also want you to consider how pivoting your instruction and assessment would result in the need to shift other components of your system. It's not as simple as finding a tech-enabled solution to have students navigate through if you're in a complete virtual setting. There's a lot of dispositional concerns that we need to take into account. We also want to look at some policies as well as those practices. And we're very, very lucky to have voice from the field to share some of their experiences that we can build off of. And then finally, we want to make sure that you're given the opportunity to explore how a competency-based framework offers opportunities to address these new challenges in meeting students where they are in their learning. And we're going to give you the framework, and we're going to go a little bit deeper in looking at how you navigate shifts when you're thinking of the framework and you're thinking of the larger system. And to introduce that framework, I'm going to pass it back over to Rose.
Thank you, Dan. As we look at CBE as a whole, we're really looking at, personalized competency-based education for deeper learning. And we really stress the deeper learning piece of this. I think through my experience in talking with lots of folks over these last couple of months, it certainly stresses the need to think about the changes that we're making in meeting students' needs as being more systemic. And this is why throughout our work, we consider it as gears working together. For all of you, wherever you are, okay, in your journey, either towards CBE or even if you're in a traditional setting and you need to start thinking about making some changes in service to kids, you'll have different entry points into this work, but we always back up into what we call the architecture of CBE. It isn't the traditional one. You cannot fix the traditional to make this work. You have to think about this work very differently. And for that reason, it's systemic. And wherever you are in your system of change that you're at, you want to keep in mind all of the components of the system. We're going to go into how they're connected a little bit later on. But for now, let's take a look at the major areas of that architecture. First off is the competencies. We really stress, and when I say competencies, I mean academic competencies, the high-level conceptual understandings within each discipline. They are important. It's important that they're connected throughout the learning journey for kids K through 12. And underneath that, you have standards, and underneath that, learning progressions. But this goes beyond the standards-based approach. That's one of the pieces of feedback I've gotten from a lot of folks who've been driving standards-based pieces virtually or remotely, is that it isn't just working for them. You have to be thinking of the why. Why are you asking kids to learn this? What are you looking for in terms of proficiency for the outcomes of their learning? And with that, a lot of the research that we have currently in our field really does bring to light the need for what I call the personal success skills. They're also known out in the field as 21st century skills, dispositions, work-study practices. That set of skills is generally the set of graduation expectations that your community will have for your graduate. All of this work around our architecture that we have here is really based on who's your graduate, all right? What are the values and what are the characteristics, skills, and proficiencies that your community expects when a student graduates from high school? And how do you build a system to meet that K through 12? You're going to find out, if you haven't done that work, that your community is recognizing in that portrait of the graduate many of those personal success skills. And in your model for building towards competency, you also have to teach and have the kids learn those particular success skills. So the competencies become really important. Academic competencies that are measurable, that are rigorous and transferable. It gives opportunities for kids to learn as well as to show what they know, empowering their own learning, moving on when they're ready to learn the next piece, as well as planning their personal goals and really having a continuum of personal development across those success skills. And so I'm going to turn it over now to Karen, who's going to speak a little bit more about the other parts of the architecture that have to work together. So Karen.
Thanks, Rose. Oh, not next slide.
Oh, I'm sorry.
If we could just go back to that last slide. So one entry point is to think about your competencies. And as Rose said, they're bigger descriptions, bigger conceptual ideas than individual standards. And that's important because if you're going to design assessments that aren't checklists, we feel very strongly you have to move towards performance assessments. We'll talk about a range of ways that you can design performance assessments, from formative to summative to longer term projects. But without the grounding in what you really expect, it's hard to design good performance assessments. And so I noticed when people were entering into the chat, a lot of people were saying we want information about grading, and Rose is going to speak a little bit to that, and I will as well in this webinar. But you can't really change how you grade until you change how you assess. You can't change how you assess until you really know what your expectations are. I was in a webinar with Tom Gusky last week, and people were asking questions about grading. He said, well, one thing you have to remember, the grading has to match the expectations. So those are pieces that are important. And I'll just let Dan finish off this slide talking about the pathways that help kids get along the pathway to perform those tasks in the assessments.
Thank you, Karen and Rose. Learning pathways are, I like to think of the spine and the backbone that tends to, design-wise, pull all these other components in alignment. So when I'm thinking of learning pathways, I'm also thinking about personalization. I'm also thinking about ownership and agency. That pathway has to be varied and multiple. There's a tight and a loose. The tight is those learning pathways are built with standards and performance indicators that will fill up indicators or a body of evidence to denote competency. That's where those competencies come in. But in order for that student to navigate that pathway, they need to not only know the knowledge and the skills, but they need to have the dispositions. And I've seen, we're going to talk, one of the schools is going to be really sharing around that whole idea of self-awareness. I think it's very important. And as the performance assessments are really going to be generating that body of evidence and the evidence-based grading. So to me, when I think about pathways, I'm thinking about multiple pathways. I'm not thinking about getting to graduation. I'm thinking about what is their current position right now and what does beyond graduation look like. That's what our true pathway does. And it provides, if you were to think of high school redesign, you're thinking about it as a career ladder. You're thinking of it going beyond graduation, but also transparent and viable for the student to understand where they are in relationship to where they need to be. And then in that design, the teacher will also understand where that student is in relationship to where they need to be. And that's where you can target instruction, provide alternative assessments. And I think this is really, in many ways, I think it's the spine. So that's what we think about competency-based education. I'm going to pass it over to John because I think he has a poll for us.
Yes, thank you, Dan. And obviously, before I get the poll, a discussion about pathways, as many of you all know, there's such exciting connections between our state's focus on college and career pathways work and the work around competency-based approaches. But those are big shifts that the presenters just talked about. So as you think about the components for deeper learning that we talked through, we'd like you to reflect a little bit through this poll on what are some of the challenges that you've seen in response to remote learning that may have you thinking about potential shifts and how you're approaching teaching and learning next year, or how you're working with your districts around these issues. So what we'd like for you to do is to identify your top 2 challenges and responses to remote learning. Take a moment. We're gonna give you about 15, 20 more seconds. We'd just like to be able to capture these challenges within this poll. We'll give you about 10 more seconds. All right, great. I think we can go ahead and end the poll results. And so this is, as we're sharing this out, as you can see, really some of the challenges that were faced wasn't necessarily around grading and assessments, but looking at these issues of student supports, the equity framework, classroom culture, and engagement issues. And we'd love to give Karen or Dan or Rose just a moment to reflect on what you see in these poll results here.
Yeah, I'd like to just respond to the fact that student supports and equity, and I think that's where the greatest struggle is around moving to remote systems, is that we can't rely on the face-to-face supports that we've had with kids in the classroom. All of a sudden it's virtual, and we have to look for different tools to do that. I think one really important piece to student supports, and it's something that I learned a lot from working with the Furrier, Michigan group, is that when you're working remotely, you really have to think about family education. when students are in their family units, how they're learning, who's supporting them. You really have to broaden your scope for what student supports actually look like as part of your instructional planning, as well as equity. We've really blown open the issues of equity as we've tried to serve our students more remotely. And I think we really need to look very carefully about how we structure our learning so that every child has the opportunity to be successful with the supports that they need. And that's what CBE offers really as guideposts for this.
Great. Thank you, Rose. Well, good. We'll keep moving forward. And now next we'll turn it over to Karen.
Hey, thanks. So you'll see these visuals of gears. One of the things we want to represent by the gears is that if you're making systemic change, you can't make little changes. And I think a lot of times schools who try to make one little tweak to one little piece realize that it's not working long term. You can't scale it. So we've organized 3 major categories of shifts. And you'll notice that some of these bullets were in our poll. We pulled a couple from each of these, but they're very interrelated. So if student supports and equity, which is under the student-centered classroom, is an issue, then you have to think about, well, what are your policies that are related to that? What is your professional learning that's happening so that teachers know how best to support that learning or build the culture? And of course, under teaching and learning, how are you guiding the way you assess and support kids' learning? So that is just one example of the interrelatedness of these 3 areas. You got, when you registered, you got a handout that gives a little bit deeper description of each of these areas. And we'll go through each of them in a little bit more detail. But you may want to look at, well, what is traditional policy really look like? And if you've been an administrator, like all of us have, we know that you have policies around everything in a school. And so one shift in policy is going to affect the way curriculum is delivered, the way you support students. As a matter of fact, some schools start there as their entry point to competency-based, as they recognize that all students are not getting a high quality education, and they figure if they can change that and shift that area, everything else should flow from that. Now, Rose is going to talk to you about organizational shifts.
Yeah, I think this is one of the hidden shifts. Actually, we discover it as we work with folks, you know, in the field, and we look at different pieces of professional learning that they're going through, and then they try to back into their current structures or organizations, and that's where there's difficulty, there's tension there. And so we really pulled out from those experiences what we consider as things that you have to think about in terms of how your organization is actually structured and what it's based on. Of course, policy is the first thing. And I know that leaders tend to think about through those policy issues maybe a little bit more than teachers do in their classrooms. Teachers think more of practice than they do of policy. But it's really important to line up your policy and to really have on board the political pieces of your system, your school boards and the policy makers there. What do those rules look like? How are those rules currently supporting the type of teaching and learning that you want to have go on K through 12 through your system? And this is where we really have to have you think about, if you're a high school, you have to be thinking K through 12. If you're middle school, you have to think K through 12. Your organization must think K through 12 because that's the walk that your students are going to take through the learning. So policy becomes very important in looking at it that way. Leadership is key. We need to have leaders that understand that supporting teachers in learning, new professional learning, as well as the culture for the learning that's going on within your school, how to best support kids through that. It really introduces different ways of working. The traditional way of having teachers come to school every morning, you know, for 8 o'clock and leaving at 3 in the afternoon totally got blown away. And through all of the last couple of months, as teachers have been speaking back and giving feedback about their experiences with this new learning, that is really up to leadership to understand what they need to support them in the new situation that they're in, and maybe the situation that's coming up during this coming school year. How do you support them through change is part of professional culture, and how to learn how to do new things. Professional learning, embed it within the opportunities that we give our teachers to connect as faculty. Again, remotely, but we have to prioritize what their needs are. How do you know what their needs are? How are you reaching out to your faculty? We just can't simply ask, and I've heard the horror stories. I've heard school leaders who say to teachers, you have to log on to your computer at 8 o'clock in the morning, and I expect that you're logged on till 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and you have to run your schedule remotely the way you run it in your classroom. That doesn't work in this new world that we're in. And so leaders have to learn also. All right. So I think you have to think about all of those different pieces to these systemic shifts, but you also have to think about, and we ask you to really kind of let this sit for a little bit as something to nag you as you think about the future, is do you see a logical entry point in your organization to address the challenges of virtual learning? Where are you getting this input? All right. How are your teachers participating in this? And it becomes, very, very important. One of the pieces that we looked at, and you'll see in the book, we give you the opportunity within the context of the book to write in the book, to give reflections. This is one of our reflections on organizational shifts. But we tried to think through systemically what is the key piece. And if you can go to the next slide, I want to spend a little bit of time with that. There's something that holds things all together, okay? And that can really be at the heart of making your organization respond, okay, to where you want to go. And we really call this work on your holistic proficiency scale. This is where it's going to pull together what you want to do with your academic competencies, what you want to do with personal success skills, how to look at assessment, and how to look at grading. And so you want to look at, in terms of your local pieces, your local assessment and grading policies. You have to know what that's going to be before you can write the policy for it, okay? In that, you're going to be describing the types of assessments that you're going to grow into, what you're really looking for deeper learning, what the evidence will be for that student to cross the stage at graduation. We look for evidence-based pieces, and that's the important part of competency-based grading. It must be dependent upon an assessor's evaluation of a body of evidence around student learning. And so a lot of folks think that, you have to drastically move the system to something that doesn't look anything like what the traditional system looks like. We argue with that a little bit, because we know that you can, because we've never done it before in traditional grading, we need to define what an A is, what a B is, what a C is. We don't use D's or F's in competency-based education, because that's the point where inequity happens. If you record failure for students, it is up to us as educators to bring those students to proficiency. Not yet competent or insufficient work shown is a better indicator of that. Let's just start with what we define as competent. Competent really means a student's ability to perform, to transfer their learning, to apply their learning, demonstrating both basic skills and application or transfer of what you've identified as essential content and skills. Not all the standards, only what's most essential. Okay, so those are the pieces that become really, really important as you look at it at a proficiency scale. The other piece too is, and I think I just lost my screen, so I'm going to have to log back on. Oh, can you still hear me all right?
Yes, yeah, Rose.
Okay, all right. I'll
Great.
catch my screen later. But as you look at that proficiency scale, it should pull things all together. All right. You can keep your current grading system and then start building in, okay, ways in which you're going to engage your teachers in professional learning around creating good performance assessment and curriculum, okay, that supports a CBE model.
Great. Thank you,
I'm
Rose.
going to stop there, and I'm sure there probably is going to be quite a few questions that will emerge from that.
Yes, and again, we encourage folks to put questions both in the chat, or if you want to add them to the Q&A section, we'll be able to address those later. We've also got a few questions. We are going to make the slide deck. It will be emailed out to all the folks who are registered, and you'll have the ability to share that out from there. But one of the important components for this morning is that we want to hear from those Illinois sites who have been involved with addressing these different components of the model that you're hearing about. And starting around the issue about how different sites have navigated the organizational shifts associated with competency-based approaches. So we're going to start out hearing from the Kankakee School District and Chicago Public Schools, and I want to turn it over to Felice Eibert, please.
Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here amongst friends. And like I said before, I mean, these are the people that are making things happen all across the nation. So I'm so excited to see everyone and kind of share all of the hard work that our administrators and teaching staff have been doing in Kankakee. So I think I want to talk just a little bit about, you know, we've been engaged in the work about 4 years, and I feel that every year is a reboot. And so I feel like we're going in, we had a year of planning, now we're going into CBE 3.0, because each year we learn more and we get better and we kind of refine things. With that being said, I just want to really, you know, kind of touch point on this work is really hard and really difficult. And I think that when you look at those organizational shifts, I think that that's a mindset and a skill that administrators and teacher leaders and staff and parents and students have to get better at, because we're used to having, you know, something kind of tied up in a neat, pretty package. You know, we've all been in education a long time. You do the work and it goes in a binder and then it sits on the shelf somewhere and then you never look at it again. This is constant revision and reflecting and changing and tweaking as you go. And what you decide, you know, 1 week when you look at student work or feedback, you might have to change. And that's very different than how we usually kind of function in education. The other thing with the organizational shifts is I feel that, you know, our work in CBE kind of shined a light on a lot of those systemic inequities and lack of opportunities for all students. However, with the COVID crisis, I feel like that just tore the lid off of everything. And now everything is transparent. And in our district, we really struggled with that transparency and that shift from time being constant and learning being the variable to learning being constant and time being the variable. And so I think that when you're looking at those organizational shifts, there's some things that we have to struggle with as a district that can potentially be barriers to the work. And I'm going to talk a little bit about like scheduling. So a traditional high school schedule can be a barrier to equity and opportunities because the work is very siloed. It's 50-minute classes. I always say a traditional high school is, you know, cells and bells. And so we want to move away from that. The other kind of systemic inequity is courses and credit. You know, you can graduate high school with straight D- and walk across the stage and get a diploma. And that is not what we want to happen for our kids. We want to make sure that our kids are empowered with all the skills that they need to be successful post-secondary. Another systemic piece that we've really been working on in Kankakee is aligning our profile of a graduate and kind of developing some universal competencies that live across all content area. And I know in Illinois, we did some work with Justin Wells, and one of the things that he had talked about really stuck with me. He said, you know, your characteristics or your profile of a graduate, what's the driver's test for that? So if you say that students are, you know, global learners, what's your driver's test for that? And I think Dr. Hess was talking about this earlier when she referenced, you know, it has to be evidence-based. How do you know that your students are able to do that? So that's another systemic shift. The other systemic shift for us, an organizational shift, is moving into an academy model. So really looking at what are those potential career pathways for students and moving away from what do you want to be when you grow up to what problem in the world do you want to solve and what's a potential career pathway for you to do that. We're really fortunate in our district because we are a pre-K through high school district. So we're able to really start building some of that foundational work at the younger grade levels and then move up into high school. The other organizational shift is, I always say this in a kind of a way that sticks with me, is electives by choice and not chance. You know, so many times in a traditional high school, students have a hole in their schedule and then we have to fill them with something. We really want to make sure that we're really looking at students where they are and where they need to be, and then making sure that they have those opportunities for them to move forward. And finally, I just want to leave with this slide. I know that this came out of the work when we first got started with the ISB guidance, and I think that language can also be an organizational shift, making sure that everyone is speaking the same language, because the work is hard and the work is unknown. And the more that you can clarify and be on the same page, the less confusion there is when you're making these shifts. And that helps with a lot of the communication to your staff, to your parents and families, and then also to your community stakeholders. So this umbrella metaphor really has been helpful as we've been going forward. And so looking at that, because I know someone talked about it, I don't remember if it was Rose or Karen, talking about competencies and standards, and really understanding that a competency is a bundle of standards. I'm just going to leave with one saying as you're in this work. I feel like a lot of times we're in the Wizard of Oz and we see that yellow brick road to the Emerald City, but a lot of times these barriers, these organizational barriers, are like, step away from the man behind the curtain, right? There's all of these roadblocks that we have to keep problem solving through, and we have to keep finding the workarounds so that we continue to move forward and make sure that all of our students graduate with those skills that they need to be successful.
Great. Thank you so much, Felice. I know really the coupling that Kankakee School District has done of its career pathways work with the work in competency-based approaches has been really powerful. So with that, I want to turn it over to Damar Smith, who's been leading the competency-based efforts within Chicago Public Schools. So Damar.
Thank you, John. Yes, my name is Damar Smith. I'm the project manager of competency-based education at Chicago Public Schools. CPS has been doing CBE for 3 years. Our first year was a planning year. For the last 2 years, we've been implementing across 10 different high schools within the district, right? So CBE really focuses on moving students at their own pace, giving them multiple opportunities to succeed. We have 10 high schools that are doing this work in a district that has over 355,000 students. And so my work supports about 11,000 of those students. So I wanted to show you this high school slide because it's a part of our 5-year goals for all high schools across the district. And our work in this particular initiative that I'm going to talk about helps us in terms of milestones with the first 2 milestones that you see. So freshmen, 90% of our freshmen being on track, and 90% of our students graduating from high school within 5 years. The goal is to be able to accomplish that by 2024, right? This work as well really focuses on equity and academic excellence, and that initiative is summer extended learning. So we can go to the next slide. So summer extended learning is broken into 2 different pathways, or you can call them just opportunities for students, right? For some of our students, they will not meet mastery by the end of, let's say, June, right? So June 18th was the time in which our school year ended, and some of our students won't meet mastery by then. And in terms of a policy shift, we were able to extend the year for students that did not meet mastery to be able to have more time to do so. Right. Another opportunity that we have for students is acceleration courses for students that want to be a part of credit-bearing acceleration courses that enable them to have more AP and dual enrollment and dual credit opportunities as well. Now, this idea isn't just something that came to mind for me as like an epiphany. It's something that was a promising practice within our schools. We had one school, Juarez, that has been doing this work for at least 4 or 5 years. So what Juarez essentially did was set a precedent for what this could look like. And in terms of policy shift, we were able to leverage that precedent for extending this opportunity for more schools within our district. So now we have 5 schools that have the opportunity to extend the year and offer more opportunities for students, whether it's through mastery sessions or acceleration opportunities. And through those conversations, we were able to bring a number of different departments to the table to be able to make this happen. So when we had school quality measurement and research at the table, ITS at the table, procedures and policy at the table, and they enabled us the opportunity to extend the year to July, submit grades by July 31st, to keep the grade book open, right? These are all policy shifts, and to submit grades in bulk for students. So without them at the table, this would not be possible. We were also able to gather data to make connections to those district goals that I talked about. And that really stressed how important this work is so we can get funding to continue to do this and scale up. The first year when we did this work, which was last year, 3 schools that participated. Now we have 5 schools out of 10 that are doing this work, right? And so without that data, we wouldn't be able to make that happen. Lastly, what I want to say is, we've been able to enhance the model through professional development, recognizing like the COVID shift that, teachers need more support and professional development with Google Classroom and a number of other technology opportunities and shifts that need to be made during remote learning. So we were able to do that this year. And so actually Friday, we had a professional development and training on Google Classroom to support teachers in better supporting students through this work. Our next stage is to continue to look at data and analyze where we could be making shifts throughout the year to make sure that less of our students need mastery sessions during the year. And what can we do throughout the summer to ensure that more of our students are meeting proficiency? Through this work, we've increased proficiency rates from 90% at Juarez through all of their grades to 94% last year. We saw a 10% shift in certain courses in terms of proficiency rates last year as well. So we know this work is important. We know it's the best thing for students, and we're going to continue that and continue working on improving.
Great. Thank you, Damar. And I think Damar's really showing how even within a system the size of Chicago Public Schools, you can make those major organizational shifts and hopefully can inspire some other districts or regional superintendents to think about the role that you can play also within your areas. So good, we're going to go ahead and now shift to the next focus area, and I'll turn it over to Karen.
Thanks. So even though Damar and Felice were talking about organizational shifts, you could see how they impact some of the teaching and learning shifts that we have identified. We have 4 broad areas: the academic competencies, how do you build them so that they are rigorous? Personal success skills, how do you incorporate them into the work the kids are doing, not a sidebar that they do once a week, but are they applying collaboration skills or self-direction skills while they are working with their peers? We're going to talk a little bit about a range of performance assessments. So there are many different kinds of performance assessments, and they don't just happen at the end. They should be happening along the pathway, which leads to a better way to grade and report. We can go to the next slide. So several people have referenced Liz Perez. I saw her say something in the chat box about the deficit model. So CBE is not a deficit model. It says the kids are on a path. Damar mentioned that they changed policies so they could allow enough time for kids to move along that path. So this is sort of a recurring theme that in any classroom, all of us have probably been teachers for many years. You have to be honest and say everybody isn't in the same place at the first day of school or the last day of school. They're on a path. And competencies help us to define that path so that we have intentional teaching and intentional supports along the way. So in other words, we're not simply saying, I hope you get there with the series of lessons that I have planned or I bought a book with them in. I have actually thought about the end point, and then I've thought about, well, how do you develop expertise along the way? And that provides me opportunities to assess. If you remember when Rose showed the holistic scale, this mirrors the holistic scale. The basic skills are on that first leg of the path, and they build to more transfer of knowledge and skills as students move along. And then if we can go to the next slide. So now if we think about assessment, performance assessment are things that kids do. They don't tell you what a perfect dive looks like. They dive, they go to the diving board and they demonstrate that perfect dive. And then they have a way of evaluating how well they did that dive. So we talk about assessment as a continuum, beginning with short cycle, diagnostic tasks, formative tasks that actually are asking kids to do smaller pieces of the basics, then begin to put them together, usually in a course embedded performance task. And a lot of schools stop there. A lot of schools say, if we use some performance tasks, then that's the end, that's what we do at the end of a unit. And we're saying there's something more complex. Now we can move into things like project-based learning or problem-based learning. They're slightly different. Problem-based learning came out of the medical field, where you are given a patient with problems and you diagnose those problems and you come up with solutions. Project is a little bit broader and maybe takes more time. And then we have schools that have started to use things outside of school, such as internships and extended learning opportunities, and even moving towards capstone. So there are many different ways to use performance assessment along the continuum. And what we talk about is develop a performance scale, a scale that says, this is a way that you can move along this path. And you can do it in many different ways, because none of these is going to lock you into one particular essay or reading one particular novel. As a matter of fact, working with Concord Technical Center in New Hampshire, they've taken each career path and they've built visuals of, well, what does it look like if you're in the graphics arts program? What does it look like if you're in the health sciences field? And they show how the tasks become more complex as you move up that scale. And as a matter of fact, they've created posters that they have in their classrooms, and it helps kids to understand that if you do really well on those short cycle formative tasks, that doesn't mean you've met a competency, that you have to do really well on more complex tasks if you want to move from changing tires in a shop, an auto body shop, to actually being the shop foreman. And let's go to the next slide. So this is all to say that we're building a body of evidence, and the body of evidence starts with the daily learning targets. And this is an animated one, John, so if you, or Sarah, you just want to hit it one more time. So a daily learning target is probably part of a competency. So you say, well, how can I take this apart? How can I make sure my students know some of the pieces before we start to put them together? And the daily learning targets are mostly formative, but they can be performance tasks, perhaps done by small groups of students. The uses of these are to determine if students are making progress along that pathway. Then we move to the more summative assessments, where one or more competencies are built into those summative assessments. They can include multiple assessment types and formats. And now we're trying to make a determination, are students demonstrating competency? So this is where a student who hasn't met competency yet can redo or do an alternative assessment to show that they've met competency. The body of evidence is usually determined by committee, not a single teacher. But again, this is how these systems are different, where you've said, now we're going to look at all the things a student has produced or the examples of what students have produced. And this is what's going to determine whether they need more support, more time, or they're ready to advance. So building the body of evidence is a huge way of shifting from grading and transcripts to say, you're building a body of evidence, you're building a portfolio. If you want to go to art school, you've been putting samples of your work into a folder that you can take with you on an interview. So that's the body of evidence, academically and with work habits. And now I think we'll hear a few Illinois voices.
Thank you, Karen. So we're going to shift to hearing again from two of our leading school districts that have been part of the competency-based pilot and working through this process of navigating the shifts in teaching and learning. I do want to highlight just a couple questions that have come up in the chat box. One, Karen, I know there's interest if there are online version from the New Hampshire model for the career pathways, contextualized performance levels. Folks would love to be able to see those. And then
Yes.
as we turn it over to Belvedere and to the Bridgewood sites, we've had some questions about both communications to parents about shifts in grading and teaching and learning, and also supports for teachers. So with that, I want to go ahead and open the lines up to Dave Carson from Belvedere School District. Dave.
Hi, good morning. I'm Dave Carson. I serve as the Assistant Superintendent for the Belvedere School District. And we're moving into our third year as a participant in the pilot program here in Illinois. I'm thankful I have the opportunity to share with you today some of the work we've done to incorporate the personal success skills. The state calls them adaptive competencies. We call them locally our habits of work in our classrooms. As a backdrop, our school district uses Marzano's high reliability schools framework to guide our school improvement efforts towards becoming a competency-based ed learning environment. This is important because we are progressing through a proficiency-based or standards-based model to get to a competency-based environment, which I know may be a different path than what other districts are following. An initial step that we took 3 years ago as we embarked on our journey to a PBG system was to create the grading philosophies that are displayed for you. And one of those 6 statements in that philosophy explains that students' habits of work will be reported separately from their academic grades. So after we came to consensus on our philosophy, a team worked together to examine the relationship between the traits desired by our parents and our staff, the essential employability skills that Illinois put together, the state's social emotional learning standards, and then the outcomes that are in second step, an SEL curriculum that we've been using in our K-8 classrooms. And so there's another slide here that shows then we came down together with 7 habits of work in our elementary schools, and that began being used 3 years ago. That list was reviewed and reduced to 6 by our middle school staff, and then the high school staff whittled it down to 5. So as I referenced, 3 years ago, our elementary teachers began providing feedback to students and families about students' habits of work 3 times a year in their trimester report card. Then as our middle school teachers prepared to move to a PPG system last year, the team adopted a different approach in which each course identified 1 to 3 of those 6 habits of work to really focus in on and provide feedback on a quarterly basis. So that way they can intentionally integrate it into the curriculum and into their daily instruction. To begin building a shared definition of these skills, the teams created a proficiency statement and then identified examples and non-examples. So as an entry point activity, that was a great opportunity for people to build some shared understanding around what these big concepts, these big terms mean. Those documents were then used in partnership with other grade level teachers to develop proficiency scales for each of our habits of work. And we now have proficiency scales for all of our habits of work for K-5, 6-8, 9-10, and 11-12. In addition to getting feedback on our report cards, our middle school students also meet at least once a month with a mentor to review both their academic progress as well as the feedback they've received on their habits of work. The scores that the students earn for the habits of work certainly inform those one-on-one conversations, but then they're also used to target small group instruction for homerooms that students have each day. And then there's also been some team level as well as school-wide efforts using that feedback on habits of work. As we've added blended courses in our high schools, our teachers incorporate a 2 to 3 week unit at the very beginning of the school year, focused on habits of work and how those are essential for students to be successful in a blended class environment. And as we've incorporated this into our blended course, each year we have a really interesting discussion with our teachers who are new to blended, where there's kind of two camps. One camp feels that kids have to have demonstrated the habits of work in order to qualify to take a blended course, whereas others see it as an opportunity to teach and reinforce the habits of work with students. And our leadership team has taken a stance that that really is the purpose of a blended course, is to provide an opportunity for kids to learn if they haven't yet already, or to reinforce and strengthen those habits of work. And generally each year our teachers report that that is successful, that kids do grow those skills throughout those courses. So as our high school teachers prepare to expand into a bigger PVG pilot next year, teachers are going to be able to pull in any of those 5 habits of work for the high school into a learning experience and provide feedback to students. And the data from those habits of work scores in each course is aggregated into one. It's almost like a course in our LMS, so students can see overall the feedback they're getting from various teachers regarding their habits of work. And our teachers are really excited about using this holistic feedback with our students to inform goal setting, provide support, and then celebrate their success as they grow. We acknowledge the need that we need to review how we've designed our habits of work. We built them in bands of 9, 10, and 11, 12 in the high school, which is problematic because many of our courses in high school aren't purely 9th graders or 11th graders. They often have students from all 4 grade levels. We also want to spend some time looking at the language that we've developed with our proficiency statements to make sure that they're parent and student friendly. And also last year we began using Panorama, where students can self-assess around some social emotional learning skills, and we want to work on incorporating that data into our habit of work feedback as well. So we continue to have, and I'm sure many of you are continuing to have, intense discussions about how to best provide feedback to students in a way that's equitable and recognizes their voice and their own self-assessment about their progress with habits of work. There's certainly a lot of intense discussions about how do teachers best provide support to students to grow their habits of work. And another big discussion we've been having is how do we make this all meaningful and relevant? We aren't connecting them to letter grades for courses and trying to avoid using that traditional carrot, and instead having some conversations about how we make those meaningful for our students and for our staff. A lesson we learned last spring, and I'm sure all of you have learned this, is that these are what these habits of work, these adaptive competencies, success skills are really critical for our students to be independent learners. And when they're having to work from home, it's important that they are able to work as independent learners. So we intend to place a large emphasis on our habits of work this fall and seize that opportunity, hoping that we're able to get together with them face-to-face to build relationships and really focus that time on being clear about what the habits of work are and how we can work on improving those. So developing students' ability to operate as independent learners, we see as the essence of the habits of work. We think them being independent learners is essential to advancing equity in our schools. And as Rose shared, it's also core to our move to a competency-based education system. And I know many of you that are on this session today have shared resources that you've put together to help students to develop their habits of work, or whatever term you're using for them. And I appreciate all the collaboration and look forward to working with you more in the future. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Dave. And I know we talk all the time in the state about employability skills and 21st century skills, but as you can hear, the really structure that the Belvedere District has put in place to be able to measure those and give students the ability to communicate them out. So with that, we're going to shift now to our representatives from Ridgewood High School. So we have Superintendent Kelsall, Lisa Bellata, and Eric Lasky to talk about their shifts in teaching and learning. Great.
I can't get on the camera because the host has locked me out. Can you hear me?
Yes, we are able to hear you.
All right, so I'm going to start talking about, you asked us to focus on the shift of teacher to student learning in terms of our competency framework. I want to give a shout out to Rose, who we spent many, many hours working through our language and coming up with our graduation competencies. But where the student comes in here is that our students have actually provided feedback with that transparency of language. So when they're wanting to show evidence of their work through their performance assessments and demonstrate their learning, they're using the language of the competency framework in which to do so. So that language drives their evidence of learning. And it doesn't stay stagnant. It's constantly changing. Felice, she also said that we are never going to be probably finished with this work because we're consistently calibrating our competencies with our student work to do so. And the students are becoming transparent in their language as they are working through these competencies and demonstrating all of their learning with their evidence. We really want to stress how through COVID, kids are more and more being able to take ownership of learning through their essential tasks and their performance assessments. And we learned through CIE that students need to partner to create performance assessments for learning. Eric, would you like to talk about career readiness and dual credit?
Yeah, probably one of the best outcomes of us with CBE is our ability to prepare kids for being career readiness. We have had really expanded our dual credit. We have also put in place where kids can now get endorsements. Our goal is for every student in class of 2023 to have an endorsement by the time they graduate. So that way that they were actually taking and applying what they learned. I know electives have been talked about a little bit, but we really feel like we first want our students to pick their electives, and then from there, the core will be learned around those electives. I feel like sometimes we've been backwards and like, okay, let's make sure kids have all their core classes and put in, but really the electives are what need to drive Ridgewood. And we've really been able to do that with competency-based education, because now students have so many different more ways that they can learn and demonstrate their learning of the core.
And I'm going to skip over professional development and just say that the professional development is really driven now by the students and based on their needs. And teachers have responded well to that. And we have individualized our professional development just like we've individualized instruction for our students for that reason. And finally, just to go quickly so we can get to Jen on the next slide.
Yeah. So the one thing about competency-based education is finally we feel like it's equity for the historically marginalized population. We feel like we're bringing back a level playing field for all our students that have been missing for all this time. And we've actually seen our gaps even go down as a result of our work. So if you go ahead to slide 2.
You can go ahead and put all of those out. This is Jen Kelsaw. I'm the superintendent at Ridgewood. And so our big focus, I think, for the group is as we've had to shift to remote learning, things really haven't had to change for us. We really focus on no educational harm, even in our regular setting, not just in our remote learning. And I guess the best example I can give, our staff really created some unique schedules to meet the needs of students. And so we had a lot of students who had to take over and be the breadwinner of the family during this time. And so they were able to work during the day and then complete their learning at night. And so we have really focused on this idea of competency being anytime, anywhere learning, and really meeting the needs of our students. We imagine that's going to carry over this next year or two. And so we're having to create ways to allow students to create a different day for themselves based upon the needs of their own personal life as well as their family. Are all students doing the same thing for every class? No. Someone asked about how do you, as a teacher, prepare for this? You know, I think Rose said really focus on grouping. When you look at how our system is set up with essential tasks or performance tasks, that's what they're focusing on to get to their graduation competencies. They may be doing it collaboratively, they may be doing it individually, but it allows them to have some say in how they're learning and what they're doing in order to get to their end result, which we talk about why electives become our essential piece and the core supports that. So when you look at that third statement about meaningful experiences, kids take on passion projects. We had a student, I guess the best example is during this crisis or this pandemic, Adam, who decided he really wanted to create 3D masks for local first responders. So he did all the research on what's the best material, what resources does he need. He reached out to teachers and students in other districts, as well as figuring out how much it would cost. He took our 3D printers home so that they could start printing at home. So trying to be flexible. If students have already demonstrated proficiency, they continue to move on. We don't hold them back. And it's not to get kids to graduate early, but rather to give them the dual credit and the career pathway options, since we really want them to have those experiences before they leave. If they haven't demonstrated proficiency, we have virtual tutoring, we've had one-on-one sessions, we scaffold assignments. And so really trying to meet students where they are, not where we expect them to be. And then to maintain those relationships, we use our advisory model, one teacher to about 12 to 15 kids. And we also have some teams from our freshman team, our sophomore team, and career pathway teams. So the shift hasn't been that dramatic for us to go remote. We have had to finesse our essential skills, but those students who didn't quite meet all of those have been given the opportunity to finish those over the summer. So competency-based education has allowed us to have a seamless transition, either in the building or out of the building.
Thank you very much for the whole Ridgewood team. And I think that's a great transition, you know, as you talked about being able to meet students where they are in this process, to our last focus area, but certainly not least. So Dan, we'll turn it over to you to talk about student-centered classroom shifts.
All right, thank you, John. I want to, as I introduce this slide, I want to go back to a metaphor that you started our journey with, was baked in, the idea of things baked into the system. And COVID-19 has pulled back the curtain, and we've seen there are some things that are baked in that we need to reconsider or rethink. And the two prior presentations really underscore the need to have a design with baked in student-centered mechanisms, practices, and even policies. So this focus area, I think, is where design meets delivery. You can design a very sophisticated system. You can have incredible competencies. You can have incredible performance assessments. But if you don't have a design where the teacher feels that they can let go of that control, or the students understand their role in learning and get feedback and activate strategies, I think you're going to be challenged in realizing the promises that I think personalized competency-based education can offer. So the dimensions of this shift are core instruction. And when I think of core instruction, I'm thinking of basically getting the knowledge, skills, as well as dispositions. It's not just unit 1, lesson 1. Pacing, I think, is probably the indicator. I think it's the barometer for a personalized competency-based system. When you've met the challenge of pacing, I think you probably have had movement or shifts in these other areas in terms of this focus area. Assessment and feedback. I've actually been watching the chat. You guys are so engaged. That's exciting to see. When you think about assessment and feedback, rather than saying, I mean, I want a teacher to ask a student, show me evidence of your learning. And I don't want them to get a grade. I want them to get timely, specific feedback, almost down to the, or no, not almost, but right down to their performance indicator, those I can statements. That engages them. That creates some intrinsic motivation. It becomes their new learning goal. And then hopefully you can activate some sort of strategy to help them move forward. And to me, that is the essence of student-centered learning, is them understanding where they are in relationship to where they need to be, activating a goal and a strategy, and then getting feedback along the way. They feel movement, they feel traction, they tend to dig in a little bit deeper. And I've seen in the chat, we've talked about student supports and equity. One thing that I feel, as I've worked with schools, that they've come to the realization, if you're very, very transparent and you're very, very clear, and you provide formative assessments that give you timely, accurate feedback, you're more likely to identify not just what you've taught, but what students have yet to learn. And if you build pathways, for example, the elementary schools that I'm working with, as they go into second and third year, they truly can let go of grade levels because they have these pathways that really become progressions of learning that go beyond a calendar year and go beyond a student's birth certificate. It truly does create that flow. And I think when you think about student supports and equity, perfect example, we did a PLC data reflection, and we could identify the interruptions of COVID-19. Before COVID-19 data, post-COVID-19 data, we looked at how are we going to use our current system of progressions and pathways and that student engagement and conferencing to accelerate our learning. Targeted instruction, flexible grouping, targeted or accelerates that learning. And I think when you think about student supports and equity, I think that also has to truly be baked in to the process. It's not things that you add on the outside. It should be part of your core instruction. And then body of evidence, I believe we've spoken deeply about that. And I think the body of evidence, the big question is, as we're generating a body of evidence, what role do habits of work or student work study practices, how are those? And for me, if I were to answer that question boldly and honestly, I would say you want to create performance assessments that not only that need to measure knowledge, skills, and dispositions. And we're providing feedback around students' ability to persevere or engage or set a goal, identify when they've met that goal. I think all of those really need to be part of the performance assessment system. Then as you look at your shareholders, you have to think about what do they think of transcripts? What do they think about class rank? That's where I always talk about public will, practice, policy. Your policy and your public will really need to be speaking to each other. And then, well, I also think the last one is classroom culture and engagement. I think it's interesting to listen to teachers as they're trying to navigate this shift. They've become dependent upon that proximal relationship. And I think it's exposed to them to some degree. I have the design, but I haven't let go. I'm still creating a compliant environment where my thumb or my eyes, or I'm relying on a lot of feedback that can only happen in the room to really guide my instruction. And I think the missing note that we would talk about is that's not what you need to do is create that framework by which the student can articulate if I'm on pace or off pace. And if I'm off pace, what is it that I could be doing? What goal or strategy could I activate? If you go to the next slide, please. So really, there's so many facets to this that we could talk about, but I know we have limited amount of time. So I chose to really focus on the aspects of visible learning and fuels of learning through Hattie's work. Because I really think when you think about what's baked in, I think that is what needs to be baked in is the role and responsibility of the learner. And then how the instructor and how practices activate that role and responsibility for that student. And I think one of the biggest vehicles for that is feedback and really making students think about their thinking. So there's 5 questions that Hattie talks about in terms of visible assessors or students who are engaged in owning their learning. And the first one is, I know where I'm going. Students understand their current performance, how it relates to the learning intention and the success criteria. We go back to, and I've heard it a couple times, the previous people have talked about that need to be transparent and that clear and that feedback. And I just wanted to just take a couple, like 30 seconds and just walk through this graphic. When we think about feedback, there's various levels of feedback: the task level, the process level, the self-regulation level, and the self level. When I'm thinking of COVID-19, somebody even mentioned this earlier, it's really, really important to have one-on-one or small group conferences to help them and give them reflective questions on their monitoring of their learning. I think self-regulation is really a feedback point that we need to be thinking about as we head into the fall, as we think of COVID-19, if we think about a blended or an all online or virtual experience. Having been an online instructor at the university level, I know that my value of feedback is what keeps them engaged. And I think that's something that we need to make sure our teachers understand, but it also is a manageability issue. What does that look like? What is that time? How is time well spent? So next slide. Yeah, I'm seeing there like, I'm last. So basically, I have the tools for the journey. I monitor my own progress. Going back to Belvedere and the 2 prior examples, it's really making students understand their habits of work, being able to reflect on them and score themselves and understand if you're not where you need to be, what goal or strategy could you give to them? So thinking about if you have those already in place, the COVID-19 shift is probably going to be a little bit easier in terms of maintaining engagement. If you don't have those in place, maybe your entry plan into this upcoming fall is to bring those to the forefront. What is, like, if in a classroom, what does an independent learner look like, or a quality producer look like? Have them create performance indicators. Put those performance indicators on a scale with them. Create it with them. Then have them use that scale as an internal monitor and measure for themselves to make sure they're doing their part in their learning. As if it were, we want to send the message, it's your job, it's your responsibility, but I'm here to help as you need that. So we talk about tools for the journey. They know how to access them. But I also would say the tools for the journey, so you guys make me go too fast. The tools for the journey are really, it's one of the strategies that's important, a management strategy. Think about, we're asking students to manage their learning in that virtual space. They need to be able to find, navigate, and evaluate resources. They need to be able to articulate those. So I think having the tools for the journey is important. Being able to monitor their progress is important. And all of these are indicators that are high effect size for the student learning and the ownership of their learning through Hattie's work. I'll go to the next slide. I recognize when I'm ready for what's next, and then I know what to do next. I think one of the most valuable experiences we ask teachers to engage in is to ask the students, do you know what you're working on? Do you know how you're going to demonstrate your learning? How will you know you've learned it? Do you know what you need to do next? We ask that of our students to articulate that. I think that depth of ownership is what's required for them to lead their own learning, which could be in that household setting. And I don't want to dismiss or downplay any of the concerns that I've seen coming up in regards to that home life, that situation, and that access to those supports in the home. But I would say to that is we need to not only think about the roles and responsibilities of the learner, the role and responsibility of the teacher, as well as the role and responsibility of the instructor in providing these habits of work that are activated, tangible, and allow that student to lead their own learning. I think I'm done. I think I have to move on. So I know we're trying to keep to a time schedule. So I'm going to pass it back to
Great.
John.
Yes. So we're going to hear from our last two voices from the field, really hearing about this shifts in the learning environment, and want to turn it over to Tim Wheeler from the Mattoon Community Unit School District. Tim.
Hey, yeah, so I teach third grade in Mattoon. We have 3,300 students. Last year was my first year in the district, and we've been on, as a district, on the CPE journey for a while. COVID definitely accelerated things. So remote learning definitely accelerated things. So as it relates to body of evidence, probably one of our big victories was in that week's time we had to prepare remote learning, really distilling like the key things we wanted kids to learn over this time or to reinforce with very clear objectives, but also student choice in the ways those were assessed. You know, we know choice motivates students. It also, I think, levels the playing field when you think about equity, because students can choose an interactive thing to do with someone at home if there's someone home to do that, or they might choose a different way to demonstrate that if that's not an option for a variety of reasons. You know, I had students sending me videos of themselves playing a estimating game to show that they could estimate. And for some parents, like that, they could see that evidence of learning in a different way. Pros and cons to that, you know, I guess the challenge with that is a lot of parents, because of their background, like a lot of us, you know, they're just like, where's the paper for them to, you know, where's the worksheet? Like that's, the parents are like, where's the paper? I did have some parents who worked very hard to create those things for their students to send to me, instead of, you know, some of the choices we gave them. So, you know, I think we also learned there's a learning curve there with parents. You know, as we talked about, it's like self-regulation of students. You know, if parents don't have that experience, as well. They're kind of like, just give me the workbook. I'll make sure he gets it done. But we definitely, you know, for each objective, we had 3 choices, and, you know, of course, then I would have individual conferences where I'd say, you know, Johnny can do it a different way. Like, that's fine. Or sometimes even in a one-to-one, I'd be like, you understand this. You just, you know, explained it a different way. I think it's been helpful as a district that our district leaders have created a culture where we do, like, you know, it's common, we might hear someone say, look at where we've come, because we're on the front end of this. So look at where we've come and where we are now, and look at the progress we've made. Like with students, the low-tech way in my classroom, I've seen that is holding up a notebook and saying, you know, like, look at what your son did in August, and now look at what your son did in January. And they're like, oh, his writing really has improved. As we dive into this, I think it's going to be really helpful to collect those things in our learning management system, which we're on the front end of implementing, so that you could actually say, look at what your student did in 2nd grade, and look at what your student did in 8th grade, and look how far they've come. So I'm excited to see how that body of evidence, even, you know, with technology, pretty cool if we can manage to collect those things, like a high-tech notebook of a student's experience that really shows that portrait of all they've learned.
Great. Thank you, Tim. And next, and last, but certainly not least, we're excited to hear the very powerful voice from the field of Dr. Patrick Hardy from Proviso East. Dr. Hardy.
Unfortunately, I'm not able to turn my video on either. I'm locked out by the host. But my name is Patrick Hardy. Thank you. My name is Patrick Hardy. I am the principal at the historic Proviso East High School. We've been engaged in personalized competency-based education for a little over 4 years. We actually started our work before the pilots began, before the law was even passed, thanks to the work of people like John Furrier and others. So it's been a really interesting process for us. Proviso East is also divided into 4 academies. Our 9th grade academy, and then you can barely see it on the screen there, but our students in their sophomore year enter the Arts and Communications Academy, or they choose to enter our Business and Human Services Academy, or they enter our STEM Academy. It's important that I share that with you because it gives you a sense that there's already a layer of student voice and personalization in how they're going to finish their high school career after 9th grade. Now, we don't expect that our students are going to go into these academies and the pathway they choose is their life choice, you know, like it's the Bible, but we think it's important for students to be able to explore pathways while they're in high school so that they can make a choice. Our mantra is always, we want to help students achieve the post-secondary option of their choice. It's not for us to choose, it's for them to choose. What you're looking at on the screen, though, is an example of how the classroom works when you have multiple students from multiple academies in your class. Now, we follow a certain set of standards from the National Career Academy Coalition. Most of our courses are not like this. They are comprised of our core courses. So if you're an English teacher, you will have Arts and Communications students, or you will have Business and Human Services Academy students, but that's not always the case when you're dealing with electives and so on. You're looking at the first layer of a multi-step project in the Arts and Communications Academy. By the way, this was an ELA project. It was an ELA performance assessment. And in this assessment, students were being asked to demonstrate competency on rhetorical skills, identifying the author's theme and purpose, and so on. In the Arts and Communications Academy at the first level, you can see that the students were asked to identify a brand they wanted to analyze, whether it was an advertisement or so on. There's a difference, though, if you're a Business and Human Services student. You were asked to identify a political issue. And if you were a STEM student, you were asked to check out a scientific issue. So the student has already made the choice that I want to be in this academy. Now they're getting to make a choice around which type of issue they're going to examine within their academy. So I hope you're catching that 2 layers of personalization. The teacher's design is for business and human services, I want you to pick a debatable political issue. It's up to you to determine which is that debatable issue, whether, and you know, the teacher gave some examples, tax reform, gun laws, and so on. Same as in the Arts and Communications Academy. If you want to look at advertisements for shoes or food or clothing and so on. So there are these 2 layers of personalization, and you can see the different pathways. Here's what the slide doesn't show you. The slide doesn't show you the next layer of the performance assessment, because remember, performance assessments are multi-layered. And so in the next, after they completed this part and they completed their graphic organizer, then they're asked to compare 2, depending on which your academy you're in, you were asked to compare 2 of those. Later in the performance assessment, you were asked to create your own advertisement or video or scientific issue and so on, and work through it in those ways. And so we see a huge connection between students being able to explore pathways in terms of careers and post-secondary options, but also the personalized competency-based world. And this is one example of how those things collided in a classroom. And you can imagine when we went to remote learning, we had some shifts that needed to occur in teacher preparation, an issue that may or may not have been talked about today. Our biggest focus was most of our teachers didn't go to school to teach in an online environment. So how are we equipping them and supporting them for the shifts they needed to make? But in terms of the types of competencies and performance assessments that teachers were looking for from students, that wasn't necessarily the shift. It was what it looked like in a remote environment. So thanks for letting me share today. I appreciate it, John.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hardy. Well, great. Well, I know we're getting close to 10:30, but we're going to launch 2 last polls, and we please hope that you'll stick around before as we get your input on these polls. So in this first poll, I know that many of you have already been engaged in CBE work. Some of you might be thinking about it. So we'd really like to capture the level of interest that you have around competency-based learning, and really kind of we differentiated here. Are you already engaged and want to continue to expand? Are you not engaged yet, but really interested in making those changes? Or are you in an engaged standpoint, but perhaps not expanding or not necessarily engaged? Kind of where do you sit on this continuum? And if you're in that other category, let us know kind of where you're at. Give us the information about where you're sitting generally. Great. We'll give folks just a few more seconds here to respond to that field. Okay, why don't we go ahead and broadcast our results out? And you can see that, well, very excited to see there's no one who's part of today's call with our 100+ participants who's not interested in further work in this area. We have a number of representatives from sites who are already engaged in this work and want to really continue and expand it and deepen it. And we see a number of those as well who are interested in making these related changes. So that's exciting to see. And I want to shift to our last poll that we have before we kind of get to a wrap up and Q&A. So this is one of the questions really that we have from our organizations at Ed Systems, thinking about our work with ISB and with other partners that are on the line today, about as you want to deepen this work, what types of supports would be most useful? You know, would those be Illinois-specific CBE frameworks, a community of practice across the communities, expanded opportunities for peer-to-peer learning, more webinars that dive deeper, perhaps, in some of these practices, or more targeted coaching and professional development? And of course, we have the other category, and if you're in that other category, let us know. Give you about 10 more seconds to make your choices there. All right, I think we've paused there. Let's go ahead and broadcast those results. And the short answer is that you want all kinds of supports, which is great to see. And that I think we're excited about that. But thinking about specifically how we might be able to dive deep into other topics, how do we support that coaching and that PD, but really building out that peer-to-peer learning and community of practice work. So good, that's part of where we want to be able to take the work from here. How do we think about taking the excitement and the energy around this work and being able to move it forward? But we have a couple slides before we get to Q&A. I think we can go ahead and close these out. I want to turn it back over to our speakers, just kind of wrap us up and center us back in this framework.
Sure. So I'll take the lead on this one. The bottom line is, if nothing changes for kids, you're not doing it. We've said it in a lot of different ways, and I love the examples. I want to just mention a couple of good resources. The New Hampshire Learning Initiative has done a lot of work also with work habits, and I'm in the process of helping them refine their rubrics, their assessments, and how to build them into performance tasks. That's a good resource for this work. And I also want to mention the example that Patrick shared. We've included that, all the steps for that, the different stages of that task in the book, which really shows you how students can move through a pace that's appropriate for them. So there's a lot of people who've shared today who we've asked for examples of their work, because we think there is not one way to do it. There's many ways to do it.
Mm-hmm. Great. Thank you so much, Karen. And good, we also want to provide, again, one more opportunity to learn more about the book. So.
Yeah, we're not here to sell the book, but we think it's really been inspired by a lot of folks from Illinois. Like I said, we have a lot of schools represented here who we've used some of their examples. If you are interested, Corwin will give you a 25% discount and free shipping to the end of June. And we believe Amazon is also honoring the discount. So those are opportunities. We've written the book. It's interesting. We wrote the book and we sat back and we said, we need to make this more like a workbook. I think it was Rose who said that. And so we've embedded questions, reflection questions throughout to guide your work. It would make a great guide for a book study. You could focus on different areas. So we're just kind of putting that out there. And we've included a couple other slides with other good resources that you may be interested in tapping into. We've included the links to some of these to support your work.
Great. Thanks very much, Karen. And again, we are going to get these slides out and we're going to get into Q&A. But before we do that, I want to give a couple of big thank yous. First of all, I want to thank my colleagues at Education Systems Center. Sarah Clark has done a great job kind of managing the technical aspects of all the work and will be engaged with our ongoing efforts with communications. Also, Ginger Reynolds, who's really been a good partner and thought leader about the support for this work. If you haven't gone to our website to see the blog post that Ginger's wrote and one that we've co-authored, please do. But Ginger and Sarah, thank you for your efforts today for this to be successful. And again, if you signed up for this webinar, you'll be part of our email list for this work going forward, which you can certainly have the chance to opt out in as we go into this process. I also want to give a big thank you to our Illinois sites who shared their information and stories today. That was really powerful to hear about how they're taking these information and frameworks and operationalizing that into context. So we really appreciate, we know it's a busy time for you taking time out of your schedules to be part of the work today. So with that, we're going to go ahead and move into some Q&A. And I know that we have a number that are answered. And Sarah, if we can make sure that we also have our other panelists that are available to provide input on this work. We had a couple questions that have already been answered here, but I just want to refer back to them that talked about the recommendations around a 4-point scale or a larger progression with more levels as it relates to performance indicator rubrics. And also one related question, are students meeting competencies multiple times or just once? Kind of how is that reflected? I think that gets into the discussion of how you set up competency statements and performance indicators. Why don't I pause on those two and give a chance both for our experts and our Illinois sites to respond to those questions.
Yeah, I answered the question online, but I think it probably is worth voicing a little bit about it. I think this is where the holistic proficiency scale is just critical in the work. As you develop the criteria, and that's one of the things you don't have with a traditional grading system. You don't have the criteria for an a B, or a C. You create the criteria, and that's actually what's used to create your task rubrics. So a lot of people say, well, if I create a 4-point scale, how do I back into a grading scale? It's one and the same. Okay. And the book goes into really a little bit more about the how of all of that, and how you create that system that makes that work. Okay. So I think that's a key piece on having this all work together. So,
and I would
open it up.
Yeah, I would just add, one piece of evidence is not enough for a student to demonstrate proficiency. The example we use in the book is like in sports. Just because a kid does well in one game doesn't mean they're always going to do well. They need to play multiple games and show what they can do in multiple games in multiple situations. That becomes the body of work. So we need to think of, we don't average, we're looking for evidence.
Mm-hmm. Right. And
can I just mention one thing? One of the things we've learned in transforming grading systems is that the systems that feel that they have to go to a 1, 2, 3, 4 system because it's competency-based education usually struggle the most, because they're not creating these resilient, flexible systems that are really based on a body of evidence over time. Okay, and over time doesn't mean over a semester even. It could mean over a year. So I think those are really important pieces in thinking through all of the different pieces that are connected to grading. And we always say, hold that off. That's on the back burner. That comes after you've really developed a lot of good performance assessment literacy with your teachers, good collaborative conversations about how you separate out those personal success skills from grading issues, and how you teach the personal dispositions as part of your instruction.
Mm-hmm. And so it's really a shift with a different method of grading. I know that sometimes there's thinking that, oh, how if we get away from having any letter grades, how will those be reflected on transcripts or for insurance discounts for other things? That's not necessarily the shift that's happening. It's really the approach to grading. Right. But there is a question here about how that is communicated out to parents. So would love to maybe hear from some of our pilot sites who have made shifts in what A, B's, and C's mean, or the lack of D's and F's, and some of the processes that they had gone through to communicate that out to parents. So do we have?
John, I'll take a stab at it. 4 years ago, we started out first off with multiple town hall conversations and communications with parents. We were very candid with them that school is not going to look like school that you went to. If that's what you're looking for, we're going to end up stuck. And then we asked them a significant question, like, why should school look like school that you went to? You went to school 45 years ago. So do you really want it to look like school that you went to? And once you get parents sort of thinking, at least in our experience, once you got them thinking that way, then, we were able to have some real conversation about the need for systemic change at the school. So number one, those in-person conversations, we had many of those, and we still have them. We do them twice a year at this point, those larger town hall, what is competency-based education? We have written communication that's constant. And then we did something that was interesting, and I'll stop because I could tell you a few other things, but here's one that's interesting. At report card time, we stopped sending report cards. We knew that notion would harken back to something that we didn't want parents to go back to. So here is what our letter from me says. Here is your password. Please access Empower. That's the name of our learning management system that houses our competency-based evidence to review your students' progress. And we keep directing them there. You're not going to get a piece of paper, that type of thing. We keep every, 4 times a year and at progress time. please go to Empower to view your students' progress so that you can view that body of evidence, and so that they weren't looking for those traditional grades. Our biggest issue was communicating with the state, because we were doing, we still do a 1, 2, 3, 4. The state wasn't necessarily ready to receive those in their downloads, whichever one it is, from our grading system. So that was our biggest challenge. But communication, constant. We didn't win everybody, but we weren't actually trying to.
That's great. Thanks very much, Dr. Hardy. And, you know, I think that harkens back to, at this moment in time, parents are expecting you to communicate to them about what grading and coursework is looking like next school year. So there is an opportunity, I think, to think about how can some of these shifts be brought into the conversation. Are there any other, is there one other pilot site that might want to address that question about parent engagement and involvement?
I'll jump in, John. This is Dave Carson from Belvedere. We have a bit of a different approach than Dr. Hardy and Proviso East. So we are maintaining letter grades. We're using, Adley Stevenson has a model where you look at the preponderance of evidence. So it's looking at, as opposed to averaging scale scores, it takes a look at how many 3s or 4s a student had, and then provides them with a letter grade based on that. And that was based on a lot of conversation. I noticed Rose's comment about, have you really ever defined what a ABCD? And that's actually where we started, was that conversation of what does an A communicate to a student? And so we spent a little bit of time discussing that, and that's been a good talking point to review with parents as well. Great, thank you, Dave. So we've got a couple of other questions that are out there. A couple questions about the learning management systems that have been used for districts, and kind of more, what are the qualities that you were looking for? And I know we had a discussion in the chat box about Skyward, where I think some districts are kind of pushing them, it sounds, more to CBE. I know that Dr. Hardy mentioned the Empower system, which I know a few districts are using, which I think was built a little bit more specifically for proficiency-based grading. But any thoughts or comments, either from our experts or from districts, about this question of learning management system?
I can answer to what we're using. We are using Canvas, and Canvas has made great strides in competency in the last 4 years as far as the learning management system. And one of the problems that we did have, I know somebody mentioned Skyward, is how they didn't talk to one another as their SIS. Skyward is rapidly making changes to meet the needs of competency-based ed, basically because we demanded it. So have those conversations with your LMS and your SIS, because I think they are trying to respond right now. We spent the last 4 years trying to find which LMS and SIS was good for us. Angelique Hamilton from ISB has actually taken that lead on trying to find one that would work for us as well, and the other districts. They are in development. That's the best I could tell you. They are just in development. So using the one you have, their teachers have been trained on, that give comfort, and try to tailor make that one sometimes is the better option, from our experience at least.
Thank you, Lisa.
In Mattoon, we're using Schoology as our LMS, and we transitioned to use Google Suite, G Suite. So rather than using Google Classroom, though, we're using Schoology as the LMS, in part at least because, although I'm not the person to speak to it the most, because it communicates well with Skyward, integrates well with that. So we're on the very front end, though, so I can't speak to a lot of the specifics. This will be the first year we're actually using Schoology K-12, so.
Great.
Hey, John, you mentioned Empower already. It's Patrick again. You mentioned Empower already, designed from the ground up to be a personalized competency-based system. I'm not a salesperson for Empower, so it's important to note that we looked for a backup right away in case something went wrong. You know, what can go wrong will go wrong. And I don't know if anyone else was going to mention, we don't use them, but we were really impressed with a Chicago-based company. The gentleman's name is Joe Granda, and they are with Teacher Ease. They came out and did a demonstration for us. Again, it was for us, it was a backup. If we don't like this system, or if they're not ready for Illinois rules, policies around eligibility, and if they can't handle it, where are we gonna go? Because we knew Power School, you all mentioned Skyward, we have Power School. We knew Power School wasn't ready. And so anyway, I just wanted to mention Teacher Ease, and the company is Common Goal Systems, Inc., but they're designed to be competency-based as well. And quite frankly, if Empower ever does fall off the map, he would be the first one I would call. We were really impressed with their system as well.
Great, thanks very much. Well, good. Well, one of the last questions I want to shift to was the specific question about the New Hampshire career pathway competencies. But generally, as you heard from our Illinois sites, and as part of our policy work with Power Act, that there is a really close connection between college and career pathway systems and competency-based work. So maybe Karen, I can let you address kind of the specific question about the New Hampshire career pathway competencies, but would also love other reflections from some of our speakers about how you're seeing that connection between college and career pathways moving on to priority career areas and the competency-based work within the field.
Sure, just very quickly. The CTE regional centers throughout New Hampshire have been provided with opportunities supported by the New Hampshire Learning Initiative and the Department of Ed to collaborate on shifting from what career tech used to look like to a competency-based system. And Steve Rothenberg, who is the director of the Concord Career Technical Center, would be a good person to contact because he is pretty knowledgeable on what all the schools are doing. It's his school that I referenced, where they collaboratively created these classroom posters for their students. They're not posted online as far as I know. They're posted in classrooms. We included one example in the book, but I'm sure you could ask them about it. They could probably show you what they look like. I also know that at Concord, they have posted samples of conferencing with students where they're using the scale, the performance scale, to talk about their own work, their own evidence. And I had the opportunity to sit on some of those, but I know that those are posted and those are viewable by others. So I would say contact the school directly, and you could probably learn a lot more about what they're doing.
That sounds like a possible future topic that we can do by webinar to be able to get into some deeper conversation there. Well, really good. I know that we've had a robust conversation in the chat and then in the Q&A. I just want to provide an opportunity for Karen and Dan and Rose, if there's any questions that you see that are still lingering, or any final comments that you'd like to be able to make as we start to close out here.
I just saw a question. It's Steve Rothenberg at Concord Regional Technical Center in New Hampshire. And if you just go to their website, you'll see his name. He's I guess he's principal or director. He's the director of the Career and Technical Center.
Great. And then perhaps so Steve isn't overwhelmed randomly this morning by a dozen emails from the state of Illinois, Nick and some others, why don't we try to do some outreach from Ed Systems and see if we can maybe get a conversation set up with him to share out with this audience at some future point. But again, Dan and Rose and Karen want to give you an opportunity for any closing thoughts.
I just to add to what Karen was saying, some of the work that I'm doing with a couple districts in New Hampshire is taking the work that she's doing and integrating it into core academics in terms of personal success skills and career competencies. And we're even building in a self-awareness, career awareness, self-exploration, career exploration, and identifying the work study practices as well as the soft skills in setting kids up for success in dual enrollments, credentialing, work-based learning, apprenticeships. So we're really, and that's part of the New Hampshire DOE, they're really driving to get, I don't know if this offends, but it's really looking at a talent pipeline, really getting kids to not just think of a 4-year school, but think about the skilled trades and really building career ladders. So it's exciting work that's going on in New Hampshire, and that's kind of what we've been doing.
Great.
Yeah, and I'd just like to kind of loft on that a little bit. I know Paul Leather is involved with a lot of work nationally, as well as the work deep work that's been going on in several different states. And I think what we're hearing back is that those schools and districts who have really started down the road for personalized competency-based learning have really found a lot of answers to the challenges that have come out of the COVID period of time. And I think we need to continue raising those examples up and continuing those conversations to help bring folks along in answering student needs. I think our next 6 to 12 months in education can create some real breakthroughs that will leave behind the inequities of the traditional system of learning.
Yeah, I would just end with two thoughts I have. One, and I think it was Felicia said, this is hard and it takes a long time.
It does, yeah.
We say it's a journey and you can't do it alone. So it's great to get online with so many people in many different places. We know it's like a classroom. There's people who are just starting out, people who are well on their way, but nobody's figured out all of this. So
No.
The more we can collaborate, the better. And this has been great to hear the examples.
Great. Thank you all. Again, I really want to thank Rose, Dan, and Karen for them being willing to be a part of this work, to present on the framework. And again, I really want to give a big thank you out to our Illinois pilot sites who were able to offer their expertise and their insights as part of the conversation today. So for our next steps, what we're going to be doing, again, you are part of our little email community here. Again, you can opt out of it, but we're going to be reaching out to you as you're going forward. We're going to be looking for ways that we can share some national examples for areas of interest to this group, but also really we're going to be continuing the conversation with our state partners, with philanthropic partners, with others to say how can we keep some of the momentum and the great models that we have within the state of Illinois, continue to build on that progress and make sure that it's appropriate for our current time as we're focusing on systemic inequities within our system and also responding to the impacts of COVID-19 moving forward. So we're really excited to be with you as we go along with this journey, and we appreciate your time today, and we'll be following up soon with a follow-up email that has a link to this recording and some of the slides as well for your reference. Again, thanks for your time and your participation today. It was a real pleasure to be with you this morning.